You're listening to Hi.
Hi, I'm Victoria,
And I'm Tom.
and today we're going to be talking to you about human AI interactions.
Woohoo, what's that?
I have no idea. No, but it's funny actually. When we were first devising this, we were sitting there thinking to ourselves, "What are we going to talk about? What are we going to talk about?" But then it's funny because life sometimes throws things your way, doesn't it? And with us, Friday threw us an opportunity for a little bit of a disagreement.
Yeah,
Yeah.
actually, I'm quite proud, if I may, that we have like a very transparent way of resolving our kind of disagreements. And Victoria is a very challenging person. Obviously, no, she's a very very nice person. I'm joking here.
He's being kind. I'm a huge pain in the ass.
No. What I'm trying to say is the kind of like everyone's talking about diversity, right? Like especially now that diversity is not a thing anymore. It's being kind of like destroyed in a lot of contexts. Hashtag Trump. But I do actually appreciate diversity. But what I mean by diversity is not kind of like superficial diversity where you just recruit enough people from diverse backgrounds and then pretend that you're a diverse organization. I think you have to live diversity by principle, meaning have to accept that other people have different points of opinion. They have different perspectives. They see things differently. And whenever that happens, obviously, I think everyone's natural reflex is to say like, well, that's wrong because I'm right. Like the other person's point of view is obviously the wrong one because, I see things differently. So I think we had such a moment last week, didn't we? And maybe you can explain how that happened. I mean, just the superficial,
Well,
we don't have to go into detail.
We all love HMRC and we all want to be compliant with HMRC because HMRC are terrifying when they want to come breathing down your neck and no one wants that.
I've seen it, I've experienced it, and yeah, I've almost been crushed by them.
But you see, here's the thing, and this is why also I think working with Tom and dealing with Tom is such an enjoyable endeavour for me as well. Yeah, that one too. No, because basically he has had, unfortunately, one of these experiences, and I will say through no fault of his own. And he really fundamentally, he wanted to make sure that I didn't land myself in the same situation, but also obviously that he didn't land himself in hot water too. I think that's fair. Look, we can be
maybe I was overly overly cautious because like I was like trying to make sure that there's maybe too much information or enough information on certain kind of official documents. However, what became like kind of really interesting is the way that we dealt with resolving that problem, because obviously it's like when you are unsure, everyone has different ways to kind of gather information to double check what's the right answer, right? And in that instance, Victoria, maybe you can explain in a bit more detail. Obviously, we are both kind of, Victoria and I, working in a space where we're using AI abundantly, a lot, yes. But we try to use it in a way that is also helpful, right? So in that instance, we had a bit of like a threesome conversation with AI.
That's a fascinating term to describe it.
Maybe I used it in the wrong way. I tried to say like we had AI embedded into our conversation whilst trying to find the right answer.
We did. And I think if in this context, so what happened is Tom had one point of view and I had another. And when I was looking, obviously, I won't say for confirmation bias, but when I was looking to support my argument, what I did is I went into ChatGPT and I said, please, can you tell me the answer is X, Y, and Z true? And then thankfully it reaffirmed what I'd said. And then I sent a screen grab of that to Tom and I was like, see, I'm right. Like, here you are.
So wait a minute. And that triggered me because that triggered me. I don't even know why. I had to think a little bit why it triggered me, because obviously, we both had the same interest to clarify. It doesn't matter kind of what kind of information you find. It felt like there was almost kind of like another instance, another being, another entity in the room, in the virtual room, obviously, in
the elephant.
In our conversation, that I don't even know how you prompted AI, Victoria, but it felt like the answer felt almost like a little bit insulting to me. It felt like,
Oh, I'm sorry.
no, it's all right. It's just like, it felt like the reason this, this guy might be kind of, have a misunderstanding is that he might overcomplicate things, or he's an idiot or so. It's almost kind of like I started to read between the lines of like this AI obviously confirming your point of view, but also at the same time, I felt, I don't know, some parts of my humanity felt dehumanized. And I explained,
sorry.
no, don't be.
No.
Be,
Look, I'm saying that. Please carry on.
it's absolutely fine, because I am trying to disentangle why that is, and that's the interesting point about this conversation that we're having now, right? We can talk about it because obviously our relationship is strong enough to tolerate any kind of like way that we gather information, because we're transparent about it. But I feel in other conversations this might not be the case. So imagine like if I would have a conversation with someone else that I might have not a very good relationship with, like relationship strength wise, I might draw on AI to kind of like make my point, but basically have this argumentative power to support my point, to just try to put the other person into its place, right? So there's this power argument, but there's also the argument of like you're relying on a machine to prove your point without first recurring to a human understanding, without first trying to find a common ground by just simply relying on our shared human skills. And this is just like this was just challenging for me at the moment, because then when I found the stuff that I sent you on LinkedIn, when I found someone else making the point about, did you ever try to prove your point in a discussion using AI, right? So there was like someone else referring to it and calling it cognitive colonialism, where you say like in dubio pro machina. So like almost to say like when in doubt, the machine is always right. And that is inferring something that I think might be qualitatively different to just referring to information that is static, that you would look up in any other web-based resource, whether it's a blog post, a forum entry, or something like that. But it was just a perception, and it was more a question than an answer that came up in my head.
No, but it's fascinating. It's really fascinating to hear that, and it's funny because I mean, in these instances, I just want to say, firstly, for anyone obviously that has not witnessed Tom and I's occasional little disagreements, they can be resolved fantastically, and I'm so thankful to be in a position where I can have disagreements with someone, and you can have a huff, and you can have that huff for 24 hours and puff and do whatever you like, and then it's fine afterwards because you've talked it through. But this is a really, really interesting thought, because I hadn't actually thought of it from that particular angle. And I sat there and thought, when he sent me this article, I was like, interesting, because I think maybe what you're touching upon, and I wonder if this is an aspect of it, is it will really matter if the answer is binary, or kind of like, let's consider it quantum or binary. It's like, if there's something which does have an answer quite specifically. So say with maths, I'm sure there'll be some maths fans out there who'll say 2 + 2 doesn't equal 4, it equals something else entirely. But for the rest of us mere mortals, 2 + 2 = 4. Or if something is, I shouldn't really say the law, should I? Because the law can be interpreted in any way that you like, mostly, caveat, mostly.
The law is more fuzzy, right? It's like, I mean, it depends a lot on context.
Yeah.
And,
Exactly. And I think in this case, it was saying, well, I think there is, I don't like to work in binary terms in terms of right or wrong, because I think that often it's actually more conducive to causing arguments than not. But in this case, there appeared to be an answer that was, for those particular circumstances, appropriate and correct. versus one that sort of the other where it was like, that's not necessary. Like, so no one is going to be done for, nefarious means if they don't do X, Y, and Z. And so I thought, well, okay, this is one of those moments where, there is either a check or a cross. You do have to do this, or you don't have to. It's fine.
So it's binary. And in your understanding, it was a binary question.
It was. And so I was like, okay, well, binary question means this has been trained on a lot of data. It's scraped a lot of data. So I guess it will probably, what it'll output in this context is something that is indicative of the truth.
Yeah. And it proved right, as much as I understand. Obviously, I'm not an expert. That's why I had this question in the first place. But for me, I think it wasn't the right or wrong. It wasn't the left or right or kind of 0 or 1 that was the issue. It was the way how we arrived there. And I feel that, I think, it will become more normal that people rely on this technology in, any and all contexts, including social conversations, right? So my general kind of like challenge that I have, or the issue that I have with it, is more about what does it do to the quality of the conversation? What does it do? What might it do to relationships? Because I feel that, people are already living in bubbles. So if someone is in a situation where he just wants to be proven right, he will refer to this kind of technology, will kind of prove his point, and then basically go back and, like, AI has his or her back, and he will feel confirmed. He will be feeling reaffirmed, which in turn might obviously create a greater entrenchment in the relationship, where maybe just the way that both people will prompt the AI will lead to different answers depending on how they do the prompt, which might lead to further disagreement, because obviously they both have, put their prompt in their black box, and none of the two parties know how it was prompted.
True.
However, I also see the opposite as a possibility, that AI might resolve conflicts, which I think there's already evidence for that as well, right? Like, if, it's not going to happen, but if you would see, like, on a geopolitical front, if we would all rely on some political AI to resolve conflicts rather than, military means or other kind of like trade war, whatever happens now, like, stuff that happens, I think there might obviously be a huge opportunity and chance for us to resolve conflicts before they even become conflicts, right? But I don't know which, which is more likely. I don't know at this point.
I think I completely take your point, and it's funny actually that you say this, because the other day I was texting a friend of mine, and they said something in a message. And I sometimes experiment with various LLMs to say, like, in terms of, what do you think so-and-so means? Because I want them to unpack and analyse and this, that and the other. I have weird hobbies, what can I say? And the thing that I've found is that there's quite a difference between ChatGPT, certainly at the moment anyway, ChatGPT and Claude. Claude, I was really quite surprised about, because it said something to me, and it came back at me almost in a way in which I wasn't expecting it. I was expecting, I guess, that kind of puff piece that you're talking about, where it's like, no, Victoria, so-and-so is absolutely, like, they really like you, but, these are, and then just ream off a load of sort of like positive outlook. But it didn't. It was quite savage in terms of the way it spoke back to me about interpreting this message. And it wasn't brutal, but it was quite what one would deem candid. And I did the same thing in ChatGPT, and ChatGPT took actually an entirely different view altogether, and it was much more kind of reaffirmative and supportive, yeah. And so it's interesting to hear you say about the almost like whether or not there's this scope for either this sort of like echo chambers to be further inflated and reaffirmed, or whether or not AI can just act as almost like a needle to just go through the two of them and pop everyone and then find this connection.
I think this is really fascinating because that reminds me of a conversation I recently had with someone who tested DeepSeek and compared it to ChatGPT on the issue of corruption. So he asked ChatGPT about corruption in China and then asked the same thing to DeepSeek. And as you can imagine, DeepSeek was kind of starting to kind of rattle off an answer and then just stopped in its tracks and said like, oh, apologies, like this is a no topic. I don't think it's a good thing for us to talk about corruption because it doesn't exist. Obviously, corruption in China is a, non-existing, is a no topic, a taboo almost. And same happens. But obviously, if you ask DeepSeek about corruption in the US, then it will rattle forever. It will go on forever. So
you have to say to it, please stop. I can't read all of this.
So I think, in general, obviously, this is like, there's no surprise there. Large language models are trained on data that is not necessarily unbiased. There's always bias in the data, and there has been kind of a lot of in social sciences discussion about so-called weird data sets and weird populations. So Western educated, rich, democratic. So it's like an acronym. And I think the same obviously could be said about the types of data large language models are being trained on, depending on obviously where the data comes from. And then obviously how the guardrails are set. For example, I have a huge issue with, using text to image AI tools. So basically, AIs that can draw images, but then obviously for some reason, nudity is a huge taboo. I don't know why, although kind of like most of the arts is about nudity, right? The human body, the aesthetics of the human body have inspired countless artists, but now for some reason, because most systems are US based and US people are hugely, how do you say, they have an issue with nudity. It's like
more conservative.
Yeah, they're very conservative. Interestingly, there's obviously huge amounts of public porn, but then when it comes to nudity, so it's like a double standard. But what I'm trying to say is not kind of about nudity or anything. It's about the mathematical aspect about it is captured by Gödel's second theorem. And that theorem obviously being mathematically proven and being quite like an issue for any mathematic who has high enough understanding and intellectual capabilities, says that there is no system, there's no complex system that is both coherent and complete. And that's obviously what we're dealing with, right? Like if there is obviously a trivial question, which is like, is it black or is it white, right? Like there could, in our case, if you wanted to check anything about HMRC, it could be almost like a database where you could go in and say like, what about this? The right answer is A or is it B? Whatever, right? So this could be, trivial. But then as soon as you go into kind of questions that are more complex or more contextual, which is about anything socially related, because we're social animals, then it will always
a bit grayer, doesn't it?
Yeah, it always depends on context. It always depends on, in what instance, how do you refer to it? Like what the right answer depends on a huge amount of different things, probably. And that's where I see a huge issue with AI, or at least the AI systems that we are having at our disposal today, because they're flattening reality. They're flattening reality to the illusion of a one answer. And that one answer, interestingly, can be quite different depending on what AI tool you're using, as you just said yourself, which is really, really fascinating.
I completely agree. I think also it's funny, at what point as well does it go from, because I think that there's almost this spectrum of at what point does right and wrong no longer actually provide an adequate classification. at what point does it move from like what is appropriate to what is inappropriate? And I feel like the more complex the question, and you're talking about art and nudity and stuff in that sense. I mean, I know both of us like tinkering around with AI. I mean, I have an inherent rebellious streak where I just want to break anything that I see. And if AI has guardrails, I want to find them and then I want to break them.
Well, it's a natural instinct, right?
Of course, exactly. Thank you. And it makes me think, actually, it's not even just around the idea of nudity. I mean, previously we already had that thing, didn't we, with Instagram, where it was like, if anyone, heaven forfend, they had like a nipple out or something. I mean,
don't say that word.
About your eyes.
I guess I don't even know whether you can use the word nipple in ChatGPT. I have to check that, because like there might be nipple guardrails in ChatGPT because of its prudish nature.
That's something to be tested this week, clearly. But it does. It makes me think about this idea, because I mean, I like exploring what those deeply human experiences, which are sometimes, quite often in fact, what's really truly human, can be undesirable, it can be dark, it can be all of these things. And for me, it was, how do I get an image out of them? And I was trying all of them. I was trying, what was it? Was it Black Forest Labs, which is the one I kept raving to you about, because I was like, look, Tom, you can get anything out of it. But I had such problem in terms of coming up with, for ease sake, for helping people envisage it in their minds, I was trying to create sort of like human zombie type things, but mechanical ones. It was sort of an idea of, at what point does AI become so human that the only time you can see it's actually a humanoid or a robot is when the external components start melting away and you just see the insides, which I know sounds pretty gross, but it's an interesting concept. It's like, it's the uncanny valley, isn't it? When something's too real, it's no longer, it's something unnerving about it.
Yeah, exactly. So I think we're touching upon on various different super relevant, interesting aspects when it comes to using AI, and one that is really, really important to me is critical thinking. I feel that that is something that I try to include and integrate in any and all of my teaching events. Whenever I have students, I try to first and foremost encourage and empower them to think for themselves, right? Because especially in higher education, when you leave the trivial right or wrong area behind, you get into these complex questions, and it's decisions in those complex questions where I believe the value in future jobs and work will massively rely on. Because for everything else, for the standard stuff, you will have AI and you will have automation. Everything that can be automated will be automated. I believe in that, because that is where people want to, where large organizations will draw on efficiencies and economies of scale to extract value, right? But for the rest, for the remaining parts of our life, you want to have, and you want to be able to escalate to interact with a human, to make sure that your own humanness is respected and safeguarded, right? So when you will be relying on, a human decision, you want that human to take into account all the complexities that come with, the context in which you're in. And I think we are now living in this illusion where we kind of ascribe rationality to AI systems by almost assuming that they are actually thinking, whereas what happens in the background is just like the corks are turning a bit longer, and that's being called thinking. So it's almost kind of like an erosion of cognitive terms in the interest of technical exploitation of efficiency value.
That's a fascinating thought.
Which I think is some big tech companies pulling the wool over our eyes, and I think that is like inherently not right. It shouldn't have happened. It shouldn't happen. But I'm really keen to hear your perspective on that.
Well, I mean, do you know what? That's I don't even want to just reduce it to saying that's a fascinating topic, because it's I mean, that's, if I sit and think about that for too long, I know that I'm going to basically be like a black hole. I'm going to sort of like go inside myself and invert, because I'm just going to be thinking about it too long. But I think that's a fascinating notion to consider. Does them appropriating the idea of thinking and making it seem as though it's something that's going on to create this illusion of, I mean, it's a bit like there was a chap, it was Jonathan, I think, posted on LinkedIn, and I think we both saw it, when it's, for some reason, we trust AI's output almost like implicitly. And it's because there's something about the authoritative nature. And I know it's ridiculous. How can text on a page be deemed authoritative? I mean, inherently, in and of itself, it can't be. But it is, the way it's so confidently put out there with no revisions, nothing.
Yeah, AIs are fantastic in bullshitting, right? They're fantastic bullshitters. They can write very convincing text.
They can. And that is almost like, I think that inherently, kind of as a collective, as a species, we seek almost accidentally ways to undermine ourselves, and we seek to see so-and-so's better than me, something else is better than me. And in the fact that we're dealing with these machines and they put this stuff out there in such a convincing and a quick manner, I sit there and think, well, anything then that I do by comparison, why is it taking me so long? And it's like, fundamentally, they are just tokens that are coming one after another. There is no inherent thought as we would consider human thought going into it. It's just predictive. Although I suppose that poses the existential question then, doesn't it? At what point is what humans do actual thought versus just spouting out stuff that we've heard someone else say?
Well, I think we both know from own experience, and that is something that unfortunately has been massively undervalued recently, that there is a difference between own thought and just repetition of someone else's thought. Because like, if you really have to think, it feels different, right? Like we all had, I hope we all had the experience of having to write something down on a piece of paper or a digital platform, your Google Doc or wherever you're trying to think, write down your thoughts, and having this kind of like empty sheet of paper phenomenon where you kind of like try to come up with something original, right? I mean, obviously you need inspiration, and AI is really good for that. But what I think is really dangerous when it comes to trusting or outright blindly trusting the output of an AI is when you confuse inspiration with reality, when you kind of take it for granted, when you take it for reality, what being spit out, or in other words, when you confuse coherence with cognition. So I think just the fact that something sounds logical, sounds coherent, doesn't make it real. And that's the issue that I think a lot of people don't understand. And I think, it comes down, I don't want to kind of like push people to really fully understand and go into Gödel's second theorem, because that is like, might make them even kind of like go crazy. I think the key problem is that we all know that reality is more complex than a stupid prompt that you put into ChatGPT. Yeah. And that if you were to believe the output of an AI, spitting out something as a solution to your, prompt, that would equal a really bad form of human reductionism, reducing our existence to some bits and bytes, to some, long form, token output, to some kind of like coherent bullshit answer that might be true, but also might exactly be not true, depending on your situation.
It's so true. And then also, actually, the thing that tends to sort of building on that makes me chuckle quite a lot, actually, is that people don't even realize, I mean, to prompt, and I know we've spoken about it before, but I mean, using AI, even in prompts, it's not like they're natural. They're not natural forms of writing. It's something that you have to learn to do accurately, and then you have to also adhere to certain specifics and guidelines in order to get the best out of the machine that you're actually, or the best out of the particular piece of technology you're trying to get output from. And kind of with that, people, it's slightly sad actually. People will invest so much time and energy and will into trying to get this particular piece of tech to spit out something that they think says what they want to say, rather than actually, it's going to sound a bit sort of like heebie-jeebie or whatever, but, you know, rather than actually taking that time to sit with themselves and think, well, what do I actually want to say? And it's just a weird thought there. It's kind of, it's inherently, well, it's just inherently slightly ridiculous, actually. It's the same amount of time. In fact, it would probably be more efficient to just sit down there and think of what you want to say and write it down and send it off.
Yeah, the thing that really puzzles me is that sometimes, so with all the interactions that we are starting to have with AI, which we consider, which we normalize, I think very few people realize that actually, you know, asking the right question might become more important than getting the right answer. And as an example, I want to, you know, use a situation that I have been in myself where you might need surgery at some point, and then, you know, just as a thought experiment, if you know, some time in the future would have the opportunity to have like a maybe more efficient surgery that is being done by a machine that you can then prompt just with what you want the machine to do, right? In my instance, you might have an issue with something that needs to be removed in your body, you know, shouldn't be there. And then you might, you know, have a CT scan, it shows you something, and then you feed that back into an AI and tell the AI, this is what I got, like this is my, you know, that this is basically the anamnesis, this is the information that I've got from like all of the analysis done on my problem. Can you fix it now to the best of your abilities?
Yeah.
And in my instance, what I realized that, you know, even just taking into consideration that your issue might have different dimensions. I mean, at least 3, because your body is 3-dimensional. And then obviously the AI is not 3-dimensional. If you just feed in the CT and it shows something that looks like this, it might actually, you know, from a 3-dimensional perspective, look like this. So you kind of might not see something that, like, if I turn this around, you know, you only see 2 parts of it, depending on how the image has been taken. And then if you believe that this is the reality, then you feed it back into the AI and you prep yourself for surgery and hope it's going to go right, and obviously not going to go right because
I know. I can hear the AI, a lot of the AI crowd, and of course we are part of that, but going, but you can create really convincing 3D renders from 2D objects now, so you'll be fine, Tom, don't worry. No, but I take your point completely.
But yeah, I get it, but it's not even about the 3-dimensionality of our bodies. It's about the multi-dimensionality of any problem that we're living in a complex reality. So, you know, obviously you might have that, you know, even with, you know, medical history, there is not just 3 dimensions, there's at least 4 dimensions, because any medical issue has a timely dimension. And then, you know, obviously there is like a multitude of other
emotional dimension as well.
Exactly. So, I mean, in my case, what I learned from this thought experiment, that even if we would have surgical robots in the future, and if they would be more exact and more efficient in the way that they execute surgery, I might still want to rely on a human conducting the surgery, because I feel that, you know, all these other aspects of my humanness will not be taken into account sufficiently and adequately by a robot doing that surgery.
That's fascinating. It's funny, actually. It's funny that you brought this up, because I attended someone's birthday party. I realised it sounds very juvenile framing it like that. It was a party, it was for a birthday, and it was just the other day. It was for a 30th, it wasn't even for like a child or anything. And I got into a discussion from some people who worked within sort of innovation lab type thing, but particularly for around sort of like clinical stuff around psychiatry and mental health and this, that and the other, and got into like a little mini debate, because they were talking to me about how they're exploring how AI can be used in the diagnosis of, so it's much less sort of sophisticated or deep or I don't want to say less traumatic, but it's sort of less complicated probably than yours, Tom. But in this case, they were talking about the diagnosing ADHD.
Oh,
And
okay.
exactly. And it's funny because, I mean, I remember years and years and years ago when I went to a psychiatrist, it will probably surprise no one that I have been diagnosed with ADHD. I've had it for a long time. Sadly, not grown out of it. But what you would do is you would sit in a room, and basically they hadn't diagnosed it correctly for a long, long time. And the clinician or the psychiatrist sat there, basically gave my mum a sheet of paper and gave me a sheet of paper. And on there, I mean, these weren't the precise questions, but it basically asked these really, really sort of like blank questions of like, do you do X? And then it said to the other person as well, on a scale of 1 to 10, how bad are they at this or whatever? You know, it might as well have just said, are you completely bonkers? And it's like, I wrote 10 and my mum put 7. And they were like, yeah, okay. Seems like there's relative alignment there. So, yep, cool. You've got the diagnosis. Well done. And they were talking about it in the context of AI being able to diagnose someone with ADHD without a clinician in the room. And I thought to myself, well, for me personally, I didn't actually see necessarily much value in the person being sat in the room at that moment already. They were just kind of course, they could experience me in the flesh, poor thing. And so they could make their own assumption. But in those sort of circumstances, I sit there and think, well, maybe if it would reduce wait times, I don't know, like, would it be such a bad thing to have tech sort of leading the way in terms of those sort of medical situations? But again, going under the knife and knowing that there wasn't someone who was accountable, not sure how I'd feel.
Different situation. Yeah, I absolutely agree that there's millions of situations where we could benefit from AI's efficiency boost, right? Like where, you know, lots of wait times in the medical systems and healthcare systems. There's so much inefficiency. So I'm absolutely convinced we can appreciate and we can benefit from AI there. However, I think there's a huge danger of erosion happening from overuse or naive and unreflected use of AI in the process of trying to make our lives more efficient, but actually reducing ourselves to something that is not fully human anymore. And why I'm quite convinced that this is a danger is that I have seen similar things happen over the last 10, 15 years in the social media area, where technology is making us write shorter texts or no text at all, just communicating with emojis, like, you know, thumbs up, thumbs down, smiley here, smiley there.
We're going to revert back to cavemanism and just grunt by the end of this.
Maybe, you know, or maybe don't communicate directly at all, because we will have not human to human, but machine to machine interaction, where, you know, someone has a social bot that is obviously taken over by an AI that knows how, you know, that person talks and writes, and it's just like for standard requests will deliver standard answers. But then the question is communication just the most efficient interaction of, you know, or exchange of information? Can we reduce communication to that? And in my case, I would say no. I communicate because I have a need for social relatedness. I want to connect. I want to connect emotionally with other humans and not just informationally. And, you know, even knowing that I'm right or I'm wrong, that's not actually the full reason why I communicate. I communicate to know that there is someone on the other end that gives a shit. And if it's just AI, I know that wouldn't suffice. It wouldn't be enough for me.
That's a really, really interesting thought. And I think maybe if we all spent more time, it makes me, you saying that makes me think of kind of all of this stuff. Like there's so many cases now on, you know, they say AI is so useful for content generation. And I know how we both feel about that. For anyone who doesn't know, Tom and I can't stand that. It's, you know, it's almost like people who open their mouths for the sake of saying something rather than actually perhaps as Tom just said there, actually wanting to connect or wanting to understand. And I think particularly for companies, there's this idea of just push all the time. It's just push out the words, push out everything, and they're not thinking about what the intention is. And at the moment, the buyer on the other end, let's take it to the company context, the person, or let's say the body on the other end is not AI, it's a person. And so you pushing out what I'm now going to label as discontent rather than content, which is just homogenized crap, which you've put in AI, which everyone's putting in AI just for the sake of posting once a day or something. What you're not doing is thinking, how is actually what I'm trying to say relevant for someone else? And actually, why do I want to say it in the beginning? Is it because I'm trying to extract money from their pocket? Or is it because I want someone else to feel as though someone understands what they're going through or their problem?
And actually, I think it's even more than that. It's almost like a misnomer, right? Like if people say, I work in corporate communications, and they use the word communication there, but what they do is just what you just said. Like it's just like a one-way street. It's obviously more PR. It's
broadcast.
It's broadcast. It's propaganda, right? Like someone saying like, "Oh, our company is the greatest. We're the greatest. Our brand is the greatest." They don't even care, whether you listen or don't listen or believe or don't believe. It's just a constant stream of like.
It's a hype machine.
Yeah, it's a hype machine. It's a generic broadcast that has no intention of ever listening back. Because if you were to listen back, you might have to answer, and you might have to. There's a level of responsibility and relational quality, and a level of humanness and respect in listening. And I think a lot of corporations have given up on this. They have stopped being responsible. So actually, corporate communications is the worst area for me to kind of use generic AI, right? Because you would basically stop any and all attempts to maintain some level of humanity, at least as far as I understand.
No, it's so true. I literally just had a thought to myself earlier on, which was basically this exact point, which was kind of at a sort of like company, organizational, societal level. It feels like for some reason organizations treat humans as kind of much like someone would treat a clogged pore in their skin. It's kind of like you want to extract whatever it is inside. You don't really want it there. You just want to extract whatever it is. I'm not saying you want to take the oil and put it on your face or whatever, but that's how companies see humans. They see them as this irritant to actually getting your money, rather than thinking, actually, what do I want to do? If I positioned myself more on, rather than how can I get that last pound out of your pocket, to how can I make you want to buy from me, and not by leveraging nefarious means or subliminal messaging, which we all know is illegal anyway, so it's fine. But, it's a different mindset, and it's that idea of broadcast versus open channel of communication, just applied in perhaps a slightly different manner. So I think that's a really, really interesting point. And I wish I knew what the answer was, to be honest with you.
well, maybe the question is more important than the answer, and we should explore that further at another time. I feel like we have reached a really interesting point, leading to potential, next episode.
I think we have. If anyone else has any thoughts, which hopefully you do, because we're all wonderful sentient beings that have lots of thoughts every day, then please reach out to either of us. I say on LinkedIn, this is where this is obviously going to be put out, but we'd love to have great chats with people too. So if you find yourself vaguely interested by anything that we've said here, drop us a line, and hopefully you two can come and join us for our three-way rather than the AI joining us. Bye everyone.
Bye.
Human AI interaction.